In 1945, the war was over, but peace did not immediately bring prosperity. Across Europe, entire cities lay in ruins. Factories had stopped producing, railways were damaged, ports struggled to operate, electricity was unreliable, food was scarce. Millions of families were attempting to rebuild lives that had been interrupted by years of conflict. Winning the war had ended one crisis, but another had already begun: economic collapse. Without functioning industries, there would be no employment. Without transportation, trade could not recover. Without investment, reconstruction would move painfully slowly. The challenge facing Europe was larger than rebuilding buildings. It was rebuilding the systems that allowed civilization to function: roads, railways, power grids, factories, banks, markets, confidence. Every one of them had been weakened, and every one of them would need to be restored. History often remembers the victory celebrations of 1945. Far fewer remember the enormous uncertainty that followed. Because ending a war is one achievement, rebuilding an economy is another. The future of Europe would not be determined only by the peace that had been signed. It would be determined by whether a new architecture of growth could replace the architecture of destruction. That question would soon give rise to one of the most ambitious reconstruction programs the modern world had ever seen. Rebuilding Europe was never simply a construction project. Replacing damaged buildings would not restore prosperity. A factory without electricity could not produce. A port without railways could not distribute goods. A bank without confidence could not finance recovery. Every system depended on another. This was not a collection of isolated problems. It was one interconnected architecture. American policymakers recognized something that would define the post-war era. Economic recovery was a systems problem. Infrastructure had to function together. Industry had to restart together. Finance had to stabilize together. Trade had to recover together. If one layer failed, the entire recovery would slow. This required a different kind of investment, not emergency relief, but structural reconstruction. Instead of focusing only on today's shortages, the objective became restoring tomorrow's productivity. Power stations generated electricity. Electricity restarted factories. Factories created employment. Employment increased purchasing power. Demand encouraged production. Production expanded trade. Trade accelerated recovery. Each layer strengthened the next. The architecture began rebuilding itself. This is the difference between aid and systems. Aid solves immediate problems. Systems create long-term resilience. That distinction made the Marshall Plan unlike almost anything the world had previously seen. It was not designed simply to help Europe survive. It was designed to help Europe grow. Because rebuilding civilization is never about replacing what was lost. It is about restoring the invisible systems that make prosperity possible. When the Marshall Plan was announced in 1947, many people saw it as an extraordinary act of generosity. But behind the headlines, there was a deeper architectural strategy. The objective was not simply to transfer money, it was to restore productive capacity. A damaged factory does not create prosperity. A functioning factory does. A broken railway does not expand trade. A connected railway does. A silent port cannot move an economy. An active port can transform one. The Marshall Plan invested in the systems that allowed economic activity to multiply: infrastructure, manufacturing, transportation, energy, agriculture, industrial equipment. Each investment was designed to create future productivity rather than temporary consumption. This reflected a powerful principle of systems thinking. Money creates value only when it activates larger systems. A single dollar spent on rebuilding a power station could eventually support thousands of factories. A restored railway could reconnect hundreds of businesses. A modern port could expand trade for decades. every investment produced effects far beyond the original project. This is how architecture compounds. One system strengthens another. One improvement accelerates the next. Over time, the entire economy begins generating its own momentum. That is why the Marshall Plan is remembered not only for its scale, but for its design. It treated economic recovery as an engineering challenge, not simply a financial one. Because the fastest way to rebuild a civilization is not by distributing wealth, it is by rebuilding the systems that create wealth. Economic recovery produced something even more valuable than reconstruction. It created opportunity. As European industries returned to production, they did more than supply local markets. They rejoined the global economy. Factories purchased machinery, businesses imported raw materials, consumers regained purchasing power. International trade accelerated. Every recovering economy became another participant in an expanding commercial network. This revealed an important principle of economic architecture. Prosperous partners create larger markets. When one economy grows, it increases demand for products from others. When trade expands, investment follows. When investment increases, innovation accelerates. Growth becomes interconnected. The Marshall Plan was helping rebuild Europe, but it was also helping rebuild international commerce. Instead of isolated national economies, the post-world world was becoming an increasingly connected economic system. Each recovering nation strengthened the larger network. This produced benefits that extended far beyond Europe itself. Manufacturers gained new customers. Financial institutions supported expanding trade. Shipping companies connected larger markets. Technology spread more rapidly across borders. The architecture became self-reinforcing. This is why systems thinking differs from traditional thinking. Traditional thinking asks, how much does this investment cost? Architectural thinking asks, what new system does this investment make possible? The Marshall Plan was never only about reconstruction. It was about creating an environment where prosperity could multiply across nations, rather than remain trapped within them. Because the greatest economies are rarely built in isolation. They are built through systems that allow many economies to grow together. History often associates power with military strength. Armies defend borders, navies protect trade routes, air forces secure the skies. These capabilities remain essential, but they are only one layer of national power. The Marshall Plan demonstrated another possibility. A nation could expand its influence not only by projecting force, but by enabling prosperity. Every rebuilt factory increased production. Every restored railway accelerated commerce. Every modernized port expanded international trade. As European economies recovered, their ability to invest, innovate, and cooperate also expanded. This produced something far more resilient than temporary military advantage. It created long-term economic relationships. Businesses formed partnerships. Universities exchanged knowledge. Financial institutions deepened cooperation. Supply chains crossed national borders. Innovation spread more rapidly. Over time, these connections became stronger than the reconstruction itself. This reveals one of the defining principles of modern power. Military victories may end conflicts. Economic systems shape the decades that follow. The strongest architecture is rarely built on dependence. It is built on shared prosperity. When nations become economically interconnected, their incentives begin to align. Trade becomes more valuable than disruption. Investment becomes more valuable than isolation. Growth becomes more valuable than conflict. That is why the Marshall Plan represented more than an economic program. It represented a new understanding of influence, not as something imposed, but as something built through systems that create value for everyone connected to them. Because the most enduring power is not measured by the number of nations you can defeat. It is measured by the number of nations that become stronger because your system exists.
The Marshall Plan did more than rebuild economies. It reshaped relationships. Before the war, many nations were connected primarily through diplomacy. After the Reconstruction, they became connected through systems. Factories depended on international suppliers. Ports connected global shipping networks. Banks financed cross-border investment. Universities exchanged research. Companies expanded beyond national borders. Every new connection strengthened the larger architecture. This was a different kind of alliance, not one built solely on treaties, but one built on mutual dependence. The more economies traded together, the more valuable stability became. The more industries cooperated, the greater the cost of disruption. Prosperity itself became part of the security architecture. This marked a profound evolution in the nature of global power. Influence was no longer measured only by military capability. It was increasingly measured by the ability to connect nations into systems that created shared value. That is how modern alliances became more resilient. Not because every nation agreed on every issue, but because every nation benefited from the architecture they had built together. This is the hidden logic behind modern civilization. People often see agreements. Architects see infrastructure. People see diplomacy. Architects see systems. Because agreements can be rewritten, but systems, once deeply integrated, can shape the behavior of nations for generations.
Every investment asks the same question: what will this create tomorrow? Some investments generate immediate returns. Others reshape entire generations. The Marshall Plan belonged to the second category. Its success was never measured only by the money distributed. It was measured by the systems that continued producing value long after the funding had ended. Factories expanded production. Exports increased. Employment recovered. Consumer demand returned. Businesses reinvested profits into new industries. Innovation accelerated. Economic growth began reinforcing itself. This is the mathematics of architecture. When one productive system strengthens another, growth becomes exponential. Infrastructure attracts business. Business attracts investment. Investment creates innovation. Innovation expands productivity. Productivity generates prosperity. Prosperity finances the next generation of infrastructure. The cycle repeats, not because someone continuously funds it, but because the architecture has become self-sustaining. That is the difference between spending and investing. Spending ends when the money is gone. Architecture continues generating returns long after construction is complete. The Marshall Plan demonstrated that rebuilding an economy was not an expense to be recovered. It was an investment whose returns would be measured in decades, because the most valuable systems are not the ones that solve today's problems. They are the ones that continue creating tomorrow's opportunities.
Every program has an ending. The Marshall Plan was no exception. The funding eventually stopped. The reconstruction projects reached completion. The emergency had passed. Yet something remarkable happened. Economic growth continued. Trade continued expanding. Industries kept innovating. Investment continued flowing. The architecture no longer depended on the program that created it. It had become self-sustaining. This is one of the defining characteristics of successful systems. Their creators eventually step away. The system continues operating. Roads continue connecting cities. Ports continue moving goods. Power plants continue supplying industries. Financial institutions continue financing growth. Universities continue educating future generations. The original investment becomes almost invisible. Only the results remain. This is why architects think differently from builders. A builder asks whether a project has been completed. An architect asks whether the system will continue creating value after completion. The Marshall Plan succeeded because it answered the second question. It did not simply repair the post-war economy. It restored the mechanisms through which the economy could continue rebuilding itself. That is the highest form of investment, not solving one generation's problems, but enabling future generations to solve their own. Because the greatest architecture is rarely remembered for the resources that built it. It is remembered for the prosperity it continues creating long after the builders are gone.
Today, the Marshall Plan is often remembered as one of history's largest reconstruction programs. But its greatest achievement was never the money, it was the architecture. The funds were temporary, the systems became permanent. Roads eventually aged, factories were modernized again, governments changed, technologies evolved, entire industries disappeared and new ones emerged. Yet the foundation created during Reconstruction continued supporting economic cooperation for generations. This is how enduring systems operate. They become so deeply integrated into everyday life that people stop noticing them. Businesses simply trade, banks simply finance, ports simply operate, universities simply innovate. The architecture fades into the background. Its success lies in becoming invisible. The Marshall Plan demonstrated a profound principle of systemic power. The most valuable investment is rarely the one with the highest immediate return. It is the one that enables thousands of future investments that would never have existed otherwise. One rebuilt economy encouraged another. One restored industry supported another. One functioning market expanded another. Growth became interconnected. Prosperity became cumulative. This is why the Marshall Plan continues to be studied decades later, not because it solved every challenge, but because it illustrated how rebuilding systems can reshape the trajectory of civilization itself. Because history remembers the aid, architects remember the architecture.
The Marshall Plan was never simply a recovery program. It was a lesson in systems thinking. It showed that rebuilding civilization requires more than repairing damage. It requires restoring the invisible architecture that allows people, businesses, and nations to create value together. Infrastructure, finance, industry, trade, education, innovation. None of these systems succeed alone. Their strength comes from their connection. That is the hidden pattern behind every prosperous society. The greatest civilizations are not built only by visionary leaders. They are built by architectures that allow millions of ordinary people to achieve extraordinary things together. The Marshall Plan eventually came to an end. Its funding stopped. Its administration concluded. But the architecture it helped strengthen continued evolving long after the program itself had disappeared. That is the true measure of systemic power, not creating dependence, but creating conditions where prosperity can sustain itself. Because the strongest systems are not remembered for what they spent, they are remembered for what they made possible. And beneath every thriving economy, there is an invisible architecture. Beneath every invisible architecture, there is a system. And those who understand the system begin to understand how the modern world is truly built. This is LEXERA, decoding order, architecting power,